All right, let's welcome into Straight Fire Adam Chernoff. You know him, Right Angle Sports, Canadian guy, big NFL gambler. He is, I don't know if he's still doing the victory lap over the Panthers 4.5 over win total. Just an awesome hit. Adam, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well. It's not the full victory lap because there was some bleed over to the 5.5 as well, which I think kind of sits in between. But the 4.5s, I mean, last sack, you want to talk about sweating the bet to the final drive of the season. That was it.
Yeah, unbelievable stuff. Well, we got a good wild card round here. I am curious, overall on the season, we saw favorites take off at just a ridiculous clip. I think I saw a stat favorites straight up were like 27 and one, or favorites of six or more, or whatever the number was. But basically, favorites were just hitting at an alarming rate, and the books got crushed. I'm sure you saw some of these press releases. Wow, we lost so much to the public.
Oh,
Cry for them, right, Adam?
yeah. The interesting thing about those stories is there's always tomorrow, and the sports books seem to always be open tomorrow as well. As bad as it's been, as terrible, and as much as people have been winning, they're always open. Yeah, favorites. Historical run down the stretch. We were fortunate to navigate through November and December pretty well with the service and with the bets. But yeah, historic run. And it just seemed, honestly, like so many of these late games. You watch as much NFL as anybody and are betting all the time as well. Like, those games where you're expecting that last minute drive or like the underdog who's getting a touchdown or more. And it's like, oh, okay, here comes the drive. Like, honestly, for the last 6 or 7 weeks, every time that seemed like it was supposed to happen, it was like, oh, here's the favorite with a pick six, and they win by 20. And it just, all of these end games down the stretch have been really one-sided to the favorites.
Is that, do you think, just a luck, coin flip action, or is there something to the bottom of the league is really, really rotten? I mean, we saw a lot of bad football. There's like 6 or 7 teams that were just basically unbackable every week.
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's some luck in it, but also this year there were 3 teams at the bottom of ratings that were worse than any team finished the season last year and the season prior. So like last year, Carolina was a little bit more than a touchdown worse than an average team. And then 2 years ago, remember the Houston Texans, they were in that same category. Like this year, the Giants were incredibly bad. The Saints finished the season incredibly bad as well. So we've seen a lot of really bad football too. So it's a combo of both.
And Titans, I think 2-15 against the spread, which is like
Titans
apparently
were down there as well. Yep.
Is
They
that the
were
worst?
as bad of a season as any team's ever had ATS.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I like Callahan as a coach. I just they don't have a quarterback. But all right, let's get to the good teams, the playoff teams. Is there any game that as soon as they hit the board, you and the right angle team were like, hey, we got to get this before it moves, and it was like the first release or bet or however you want to phrase it?
No, because we had a lot of disagreement and there was a
Oh,
lot of divided opinions internally. And I'll be honest, we were waiting. If the Rams would have hosted Washington, the seeding flipped late. That would have been as big of a bet as we probably would have made all season on the Rams. Like I was really circling that one, and I had it in the same category as the Bills a few weeks ago, going up against Detroit, which was the biggest and strongest stance of the season. But that would have been
yep.
there. So that didn't come through. We didn't get it. The other one that we were really looking at was the Chargers, and it was either against the Texans or perhaps if they were going on the road into Baltimore. We really like that spot. But I think the market has actually gone too far in that game,
Yeah.
and it was too big of a correction. So internally, we're pretty split on that one too. Now, some things have come up during the week that have been enticing, but it was surprising how at the moment of open, it was a lot more disagreement than it was agreement.
So does that whole fade Washington still apply to Tampa versus Washington?
A little bit. Do we want to get into that game? We're saving it for later, or how do we want to approach
I
it?
mean, I'll let you go wherever the winds take you, if you will. But
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's the best game. It's a rematch, and let me get one more macro thing out of the way first.
Okay.
Adam, this gambling industry now is just everybody's trying to latch on and get money, whether it's walking bets with your boobs bouncing around or whatever it is. Okay, we're at a stage, it feels like, where people are just grasping any trend numbers and being like, "Here's a trend. You got to bet this trend." And I just see so many trends wild card weekend. I'm like, guys, these trend bettors, they got their teeth kicked in all season because they're trends. They're not predictive, as you've said many a times. And like, let's start with the obvious one. First time quarterbacks in the playoffs facing a quarterback who's been in the playoffs. It's like 30%. You got to bet that trend. there's a few of those this week, including Sam Darnold and Bo Nix. But like, how do you handle when you hear trends and your team? Are you just like, oh, that's nice, thanks, moving on?
Well, let me ask you first. You mentioned walking bets. Can I trademark sitting bets? Can I do that? Is that doable, or is
I don't
that
know if
like
there's a big market for that, but go for it. Yeah,
it's not?
hammer
You
away.
don't think it'll land the same?
I not quite.
To your quarterback point, 19 and 38 is the specifics for that stat ATS. So it hasn't been good. I think a lot of it's priced in. One, because it's known so much,
Yeah.
but also when we get to the playoffs, home field advantage is magnified a little bit too. And so whether that's reflective of that or not, like you think about the home teams and the increased home field advantage, perhaps taking advantage of those quarterbacks starting on the road in their debut, that might all kind of encompass everything that comes with that as well. So stuff like that is mentioned so often and is so public, especially in the playoffs where there's only 6 games, it's really hard to say like that's full justification for making a bet because everybody knows it and the market certainly knows it too.
The thing you do that I like a lot is, for instance, X defense plays man-to-man coverage at the highest rate. Say the Denver Broncos are one of the biggest man defenses. Well,
Yep.
Josh Allen with his legs is going to eat up man defenses. Patrick Surtain turns his back to chase Amari Cooper down the field. Well, okay, guess what? That's a huge lane for Josh Allen. I looked at his rushing prop. I think I saw 42 and a half. That's a ridiculous number for a quarterback in a playoff game. But is that the kind of thing that's baked in or no?
Yeah, I mean, his average closer in the season has been in the low 30s. So you're seeing the premium put on it. Like you mentioned, the Broncos, a top 5 defense for man usage, and Josh Allen, when he's facing man coverage, scrambles 10% of dropbacks. So his scramble rate is up about 4.5% versus zone to one of the highest rates in the league. So again, with playoffs, obviously the MVP of the season, finding something that is not known in a prop like that is very obvious, it's really hard to get around. Now, he's certainly going to run a lot against the Denver Broncos, but the Broncos know that too, obviously, coming into the game. So there's a lot of matchup stuff like that is hard to maybe find the full edge on, especially in the prop market too, on marquee players.
Yeah, for a few weeks now, I've been saying, boy, Bills Broncos. I hope that happens. I will put the mortgage on it. I thought it would be similar
The mortgage.
when Mac Jones was facing Buffalo in that playoff game. The only luck that Peyton and Knicks got here is that it's like a 1 p.m. kickoff, right? So it's not like the nighttime juiced up stadium, which is what the Steelers will be going into in Baltimore. But I do wonder, did Denver catch a break there? This number's been pinging around. I don't know what people are seeing on Denver here.
Well, the Broncos have a very specific path in this game, and that is that they have a very good offensive line. They have a loaded interior offensive line, and the biggest weakness of the Bills is the spine of the defense. So if the Broncos can come into this game and they can commit to the ground game early and they can be effective with it and it can open up play action, what we've seen the Bills struggle with is when they have to overcommit guys to the run game, it really puts some of these corners on a bit of an island. And I think the Broncos are going to be able to have success off of play action if they can really get the run game going. So I think that's priority number 1 for them. And if they can do that, the Bills, I mean, remember the Ravens game and how one-sided that was? I'm not putting the Broncos run game on the Ravens level by any means, but that's a perfect example of the big weakness that the Bills have. So the Broncos are not dead in this game at all. I think they have a path for success on offense, but to me, it's the other side contributing here. I think this game is going to be a shootout, and I'm looking at 47. I think that is too short of a total for sure.
Well, wait a minute. I'm thinking back. Do you remember when Mixon and Burrow went in there and they won handily? It was like 27-10, ran the ball all over Buffalo. My only counter is, okay, Buffalo's got a really good secondary, good in coverage, strong safeties. Wouldn't Buffalo just consider saying, hey, you know what, we're going to stack the box and dare Bo Nix to friggin' beat us?
I think Bo Nix has an opportunity to beat them if they can
really
commit to that ground game. The Bills defense is very aggressive and it's very attacking and it's free flowing. And it's great when they're playing with a lead and they can play downhill. But when this defense is challenged in a neutral game and it's a close game, I think it's far worse than it looks. And I mean, visually on screen and during the games, you can see this defensive line up front really getting pushed around in the interior. And I mean, Cincinnati in many ways was daring Bo Nix to beat them. And we saw some amazing deep throws that he was able to complete in that game when playing from behind as well. So there's opportunities here for Denver to move the ball, certainly.
Okay, I take that back. The Bills' safeties are not great. It's the corners. Benford's been excellent. Johnson, awesome in the slot. But the safeties, Hamlin has not been great. Rapp is a bit of a drop-off. Now you got me feeling a little nervous about my Bills bet. How's this one? This was my biggest bet so far of wild card weekend.
Well, hold on. Can we talk about the Bills for a sec? Because I wouldn't be nervous in that regard, because you have Josh Allen. I mean, this is going to be such a Josh Allen like trademark game where he can drop back, use his legs, as we talked about. But his ability to take on linebackers and how great Joe Brady is at scheming some of these running backs open out of the backfield and some of these rub routes with receivers like Shakir in this quick passing game, that's there all day against this Broncos defense. So I'm not trying to advocate that the Broncos are going to go in and pull the upset. This Bills offense has just as big, if not a much bigger matchup advantage on offense. I just think both teams have success moving the football. So I wouldn't be scared about your bet.
So, well, here's the actual bet. Bills money line, Ravens money line, Eagles money line. 3 teams playing at home, 2 teams over a touchdown favorite. There's some concern with the Hurts concussion, but overall, I'm not as bullish on the Packers as I once was. That to me is kind of a safe bet. Those 3 teams on the money line. Now, I'm sure you're like, Jason, come on, 3-team money line, give me a break. But it pays out 1,000 wins you like 1,100 probably on that. Where are you on like a 3-team parlay this weekend?
Like, you bring it. My default response should be that that's a bad decision to make.
Okay.
But if I'm being honest, like it's hard to see an upset happening in those 3 games specifically. I think. So
wait, why is it a bad decision? Well, be honest.
That's why I'm saying like it might not be, and that's a weird spot for me to be in to say that it might not be. I think it's a hard. I think Pittsburgh is going to be more competitive than they're given credit for in this matchup, but that's going to be something that comes from their D-line. But I don't think they're pulling off the upset in Baltimore. I don't think Bo Nix is going into Buffalo and pulling off the upset. It'll very likely come down to that Green Bay Philly game. It's the idea of what you're proposing as someone who's been betting and working on the professional betting side for almost 18 years now. It sounds a lot worse than it probably is this weekend. You might be onto something with that 3-team money line parlay.
Well, so the other angle, I think there were a few wild card upsets last year. And again, Adam, this is the tough part. Wild card weekend, historically, underdogs have fared well. I'm not going to hit you with the trend numbers, but everybody wants to back favorites. Favorites have been on such a great run. Will that run continue? Or do we see the dogs kind of barking and showing up? Give me your argument how Pittsburgh maybe steals this game.
Well, Pittsburgh's seen Lamar twice already this season. They see him every year. And we've seen teams, when facing Lamar multiple times, have a little bit more success against them. It's not we've all heard the NFC record for Lamar, 24-2 now with that game against the Eagles. And that's because there's just a lack of familiarity. And Pittsburgh is completely opposite for that. So it's a divisional game in the playoffs here, where if the Steelers defensive line, which didn't have Ogunjobi in the last meeting we saw a couple of weeks ago, they lost Porter Jr., their best corner, on the second drive of the game. And they were still able to be competitive in that game into the second half until the Wilson pick 6. And again, there was that Wilson fumble inside the 5-yard line when the Steelers were moving the football. So they played him close in the first matchup and made that ugly. The second matchup probably was a little bit closer than the scoreboard indicates at 34-17 as that final. And just that familiarity factor, I think, matters. And the loss of Zay Flowers isn't nothing. Yeah. So it's really going to come down to the Steelers D-line, if they can prevent explosives and if they can just muddy up the game like they did in the first meeting. There's a path there for the Steelers.
Interesting. Now you got me. So I'll tell you, my second best bet was a teaser. Because again, I get a little skittish. I'm leaning toward the favorites this weekend, but you know how that works. They don't always clean up. So what if I took the Texans up from 3-9? Obviously, you're only going through 7 of the key number there, but I don't know that the Chargers blow them out. And then the other one would be, I would take Buffalo down from 9 or 8.5 to 2.5 or 3, and you just got to win by a field goal on a teaser. Now, again, this is not a side or a total, and the lines are going to be sharp in the postseason. But you hear two-team teaser in the playoffs, and you're just like, oh, McIntyre, what are you doing?
No, I don't think that anyone should think, what are you doing? I think any teaser that you can make a 6-pointer at minus 120 or better, and you're crossing through keys of 7 and 3, I don't think it's ever a bad bet to make. And especially in those two games you mentioned, you have two totals that are 47 or less, which typically qualifies as what is called to be basic strategy teasers. If you can tease through 7 and 3 with a total of 47 or less, and you can do it at minus 120 or better, you're making a good bet and you're making the plus EV decision. So it's hard to disagree with that. We've talked about Buffalo. I'm with you. You get them down below a field goal. Like, I can't argue with that at all. I would say Houston as well. I think Houston has a good chance to pull the upset against the LA Chargers. So I would agree with you on that side as well. It's just a matter of, can you get the right price, which is a lot harder to do in 2025 in the sports betting landscape.
Yeah. So the Texans one's interesting because initially everybody likes the Chargers, but then you're like, really? Chargers favored on the road? Texans have been awful for a while, but there's a huge Texans fan at the Herd, one of the producers, and he's like, I'm just telling you, J-Mac, Stingley and Lassiter are going to be able to shut down McConkey. And then who's beating us? How are we losing this game? And my counter is like, okay, that's fair. A rookie wide receiver may struggle against two good corners. But what faith do you have in the Houston offense to do anything? I mean, since they lost Dell and Stephon Diggs, they've cratered, and the offensive line is probably in line to get pushed around here. I don't like the Texans at all.
Is on the Lassiter note, I would encourage anybody listening, search Lad McConkey best player on Google, and you'll get a note and like a video recording of the draft this year. He was at the podium. He was being asked questions. And the question posed to him was, who was the best player that you went up against during your time at Georgia in college? And he thought about it and he said, it's an easy answer. It's Kamari Lassiter, who he's going to be going up against this game in the Chargers. Both rookies drafted this year. A lot of familiarity in that matchup. I think McConkey's still going to find ways to get open, but it's an interesting kind of little tweak and advantage that the Texans might have their favor. I think the Texans D-line has a chance against the Chargers O-line that's a bit beat up to have a lot of disruption. And I think that these two corners, in the same way that we saw them really disrupt the game against Miami, which was another team that came in with what was said to be a good run game, what was said to be a good quick passing game, play action, similar things to what the Chargers have. All of that was out there, and the Texans defense won them that game at home.
That's right.
I think this can set up in a very similar way to where that Texans defense can have advantage. So I think there's certainly a path there for Houston. As you mentioned, the offense, it's been brutal, but are we giving them a bit of a break for the teams that they faced down the stretch? I think that's where we get to a big discrepancy in the number here. You're playing the Chiefs, you're playing the Ravens. I mean, it was tough for Houston down the stretch, and they had a very late bye. They had injuries, and it's kind of them coming in off of a mini bye last week where the Chargers are on their third straight road game. And the Chargers had the earliest bye of any team in the NFL. They've been going pretty steady for the last few weeks here. So I again, like, I go back to this number. These two teams in power ratings that were used for betting. We're talking better betting power ratings, not major network published ones that are just like standings effectively, but like numbers that pros reference and use for betting. These two teams were within 1 point of each other all season long. There was never bigger than a 1 point discrepancy. And it wasn't until week 18 where the Chargers were actually ranked higher than the Houston Texans. It took time to level out. This number on a neutral field has to be 5.5 or 6 based on this point spread that we're seeing at 3 in Houston. Like, we're just in a completely different world for this price than what we've been at for 4 months. And that, to me, off the Chargers beating the Raiders with Aiden O'Connell and the Pats with Drake May and the Denver Broncos down the stretch, like, that's a lot and a reach to get to.
Yeah. Do you think the book set it this high because, hey, nobody's touching the Texans? They've been so bad, the regression, and everybody loves Harbaugh. Everybody likes Herbert. Do you think that has something to do with it?
Yeah. And I mean, they're probably drawing a ridiculous amount of Chargers money, I would imagine. If I had to just guess who the most picked or bet side overall in terms of count would be, this entire weekend, I would expect it to be the Chargers if we're making the cutoff at a Saturday afternoon and you don't have like money line rollover instances being disrupted and you're getting like a crazy run of volume Sunday or Monday night. But I would think that the Chargers are probably the most popular side, and this number has been kind of holding there for a reason. Yeah. So I think they got it right. Like you said, Harbaugh wins everywhere he goes. Yeah. You have a better coach. You have a better quarterback in this game on the Chargers, and that's typically enough to warrant probably the one-sided action books are getting on the Chargers.
So in the Circa contest, I don't know if you know about the website where you can go look at how your picks have done, home dogs, road favorites, blah, blah, blah. For whatever reason, I was like 79% on road favorites this year. I don't know why. I didn't do great. I finished over 500, but it was only like 52.4, whatever. I wasn't sniffing the cash, but for whatever reason, I kept hitting road favorites and they kept covering it at an insane rate. The Chargers are the biggest road. There's only two of them, Vikings and Chargers. So
you're going Chargers in this game? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I like them. I just don't know if but this is probably going to come down off the 3 by game time, right?
I would be surprised if it didn't. I cannot imagine a group that has enough influence to impact a playoff point spread on Friday or Saturday leading up to kickoff, justifying Chargers -3 and moving this further. I cannot get there. If this is going to move higher, it's just because things got so one-sided. The books are willing to go to 3.5. I would be very shocked if that happens. I think if anything, it gets to 2.5 at close.
How about this Washington-Tampa game? A rematch from week 1, which you pretty much have to throw out because it was Jaden Daniels' first game of the season. But Tampa's one of these dangerous teams, man. I want to bet Washington because I want to root for them here, but my guess is this is probably going to go up to 3.5 as opposed to stay on 3, right?
It did earlier in the week, and I know the bettor who took the 3.5 and took that out. So as it stands now, I think we're probably going to sit around 3 the rest of the week. If this does come off 3 and get back to 2.5, it's absolutely getting bet on Tampa. And I still think Tampa at 3 is the side to play in this game myself. So
wait, so hold on. So your buddy or somebody it was at 3 and then he bet it and it moved to 3.5 and then came back down?
So it opened 2.5.
Okay.
It immediately got bet to 3. And then about 20 minutes later, it went to 3.5. And then Monday morning, another pro that I know bet 3.5. And that's why there were no more 3.5s on the board. It came back to 3. So we have like disagreement here between two different groups. One loved 2.5, one loved 3. And there was some follow-up action on the 3 that pushed it to 3.5. And now we're sitting in between the two. So we're kind of like bracketed, as would be expected in a playoff game on either side of 3. I would just say, like, if this were to come back off of the 3 between now and Sunday night, I would be shocked if there's not buyback on the 2.5 to take this back to 3. Like, I think 3 for Tampa is the floor of what this closes.
Interesting. So historically, do you look at that and does that factor in when you have, Joe over here on 3 and then, Mike over here with 3.5? Do you take that into your account at all when you're considering laying a wager?
Yeah, you have to, because you know who's doing it and you know how they're faring for the season and you see their action coming through. And then you also know what they tend to value and what they're looking at. And so when that happened, I'm looking at this game during the week and I'm like, okay, I can see why the 2.5s and the 3s were taken out. And I can see why the 3.5s were taken out. And I can kind of put logic behind it. And then I kind of make a decision off of that to figure out like where I fit into. And I happen to fit into the side here that is Tampa Bay at 3.
Lastly, Pat, we'll skip the Rams Vikings because that game maybe moved and there's just a lot of stuff on that. But is the only reason this isn't higher, Eagles -4.5, because last year the Packers went into Dallas and destroyed the Cowboys and then nearly had the Niners basically beat and then lost the game in the fourth quarter. And people just respect the hell out of Jordan Love and LaFleur. Is that the only reason? Because this feels like it should be a little higher.
No, the only reason it's not higher is because this number's right. I was expecting it to open 4, which it did. And I think the only reason that we've gone higher is because there is some uncertainty about Jordan Love. And earlier in the week, it looked like the uncertainty was going to be with Jalen Hurts. And so that's kind of flipped. And I think that's why this has gone up from 4 to 4.5 and could possibly get to 5. That could cause a bit of difference in opinion in the market late week. But I think 4 is the right number in this game. 5 is not enough for me to take the dog, but this is right on what the ratings would have made it in season, plus a bit of a playoff bump.
Are you of the belief that there's some numbers floating around about how Christian Watson dramatically impacts this offense? I know the numbers aren't there for him, but the splits with him on and off the field are. I guess he's a big time game breaker, can stretch the field, and without him, they've got good receivers, but I don't know. It feels like this is an Eagles team kind of on a mission here. I do think they are very deficient in head coaching here for Sirianni versus LaFleur, but I'm leaning Eagles.
Yeah, it depends what Vic Fangio chooses to do. So Brian Flores in week 17 with a Vikings defense that plays a ton of zone coverage around 78% of the time. He switched and he played zone at the season low rate and really jacked up the amount of man coverage that he was willing to play against this Packers wide receiver group. And after the game, Matt LaFleur was talking about how it caught him off guard. He was very surprised with the changeup, and they didn't see it coming and they didn't have an answer for it. I mean, the Packers looked so bad against the Vikings in that game. So Vic Fangio, as we know, plays a lot of zone coverage, a little bit more man heavy this year because he's got some great corners. I think the question becomes in this game, do we see Fangio steal a little page out of Flores's playbook and go a little bit more man heavy? Because he knows that without Watson on the field, the risk of these corners who have been awesome all season getting beat downfield is reduced quite a bit. And I tend to think that the answer is yes, and he's willing to take that gamble. And the question is going to be, do we see the Saints, or the Eagles played the Saints earlier in the year, and they showed a very unique front to stop the run with extra bodies. That man coverage outside will let them dictate an extra guy up front against the run, which could make this pretty difficult for Green Bay. And I don't know what the counterpunch is going to be from LaFleur, but to me, that Watson impact is really going to show through if we see the Eagles go a little bit of more man than they might be expected. We've seen Jordan Love really struggle against those looks this season.
Yeah. All right. We could wrap up, Adam. Super Bowl. Do you have a prediction? Doesn't have to necessarily be gambling, but do you any guess as to and again, this could get crazy because if the 7 seed, let's say the Packers win, then they go to Detroit. And it's like, oh, well, that's a problem for the Lions. The Packers played them super tough just a few weeks ago. But do you have any lean as to who will be in the Super Bowl?
Well, back in May, I believe it was, when you referenced the Panthers take that was given on the herd with you when we were on there and you had me on. My Super Bowl prediction at that time was Chiefs win the AFC, Eagles win the NFC to set up in the Super Bowl. So I'll reference that segment again and say I'm still holding on to that prediction. The only thing that I have added between that time and now for any futures relating to the Super Bowl was after the loss to the Rams, I added Bills 6-1 to win the Super Bowl, which is still a price that is available today. They didn't get the 1 seed as I thought that they might at that time. That's covering a lot of bases here. So for the sake of the show, I'm just going to stick with that Eagles Chiefs preseason prediction that dates back to May for that one.
I would be so annoyed if the Chiefs won another Super Bowl. Aren't you getting bored of them? They're not fun, Adam. They're not a fun watch. You know that.
Can't you just let greatness be and enjoy it? Like, why do we always have to try to tear down the greatness?
We've seen like
for that seems
years.
like a quote that would be on one of your Instagram stories after a successful pickup game. Just let greatness be great. And now you're trying to tear it down here on the pod.
They've had 2 years. We need some fresh. Brock Purdy had them last year. They had them in the Super Bowl.
That defense needed 1 stop. They had 4 opportunities, couldn't get off the field once. That was there for the Niners, no question. So
I go back to that
there.
punt that just unbelievable. It just flipped the game. Chiefs were getting dominated.
I'm with you.
All right.
Nope. I'll let that take stand, but the first, just let the greatness be great.
I like that. That's a good quote. We'll put that on
I'll keep an eye on your Instagram for
2025. All right. Adam Chernoff, Right Angle Sports. Good stuff, buddy.
Thanks very much. Chat to you soon.